Hello, everybody. In our previous lectures, we have seen that the measures that taken by the central bank uh, in implementing the monetary policy can mainly affect the economic activities by causing the aggregate demand curve to shift. Accordingly, the increase in amount of money increased the aggregate demand, causing the prices in the economy to increase and the production activities to accelerate. Many economists acknowledge that monetary policy has a significant impact on aggregate demand and economic activities, but disagree on how the monetary policy will affect the economy. In this lecture, we will take the problem a little further than the aggregate demand curve and analyze the way money affects the economic activities in detail. In this process, we call this process as monetary transmission mechanism and or monetary transmission channels. Although the money supply and production volume tend to increase steadily in the long run, they fluctuate with business cycle fluctuations in the short term. Production increases during the expansion periods of the economy and reaches a peak at some point. In subsequent contraction period, the increase in production slows down and reaches the bottom point. These fluctuations, that is, the transition time from one bottom to the next, can vary from a few months to several years, and the intensity of the recovery and contraction periods may vary. Business cycle is an economic concept that has been known since the Industrial Revolution and has been studied by economists since the 19th century. Money supply growth rate also changed during the business cycle. Fluctuations in the rate of money supply increase are procyclical, that is, the rate of increase of money supply rises in the periods of expansion of the economy, and the rate of increase slows down in periods of contraction. Studies have shown that the money supply tends to change before the cycle fluctuations. Increases in nominal money supply are seen before the expansion period of the business cycle and monetary contractions. Economists explain this relationship between money supply changes and production changes in different ways. For example, some economists argue that money supply changes lead to changes in production, while some economists claim that money supply changes are not the cause but the result of changes in production. Therefore, it is necessary to analyze the relations between the amount of money and production within the framework of various economic approaches. We will do that considering the 5 economic approaches, namely Keynesians, monetarist, real business cycle theory, new classical theory, and the new Keynesian theory. Let's start with the Keynesian approach that you are familiar with in our lectures for taking the monetary policy. Unlike the classical economists, the total spending is determined through the equation of exchange. The Keynesian approach claims that total spending in four main groups, namely consumption spending, planned investment spending, public spending, and net exports. When we express with the symbols, we see an equation that we have seen since the introductory courses in economics. Keynesian economists state that the increase in one or more of the expenditure components will increase income due to inverse relationship, we say negatively sloped aggregate demand AD curve between general price level and the total expenditure. Increases in public expenditures, net exports, and decreases in taxes increase the total spending level. In this case, the aggregate demand curve shifts to the right from AD0 to AD1, like in the figure, and prices and production increases at the new equilibrium point reached, and we show that with point 1. On the other hand, Keynes states that the optimistic or pessimistic expectations about the future will, which Keynes called his animal spirits, will also affect the consumption and investment expenditures and cause IAD curve to shift. Keynes considers these expectations of business life to be optimistic or pessimistic as one of the important factors behind business cycle fluctuations. In the Keynesian analysis, another factor affecting the aggregate expenditures in the short term is the money supply. Since the increase in the amount of money will decrease interest rates, the components of total expenditures that are sensitive to interest rate, such as expenditures on durable consumer goods, investment, and net exports, will also increase, and the AD curve will move to the right again. In summary, Keynesian economics acknowledge that increases in money supply, consumption expenditures, investment expenditures, public expenditures, and net exports, and decreases in taxes will increase aggregate demand in the short term. Naturally, reverse factors will also have an effect on shifting the AD curve to the left, which reduces the aggregate demand. According to the monetarist approach, the most important result suggested by the modern quantity theory is that the velocity of money is stable. According to this result, changes in the money supply are not effective on the velocity, and it has a predictable feature. Changes in money supply are the most important factor that determines aggregate expenditures in the short term. Unlike Keynesian economists, monetarist economists argue that changes in total spending components cannot affect aggregate demand even in the short term. In this case, there remains only one variable that can affect aggregate demand. It's the money supply. Monetarist economists, just like the classicals, accept that supply of money as the main cause of changes in total spending. At this point, it's useful to answer a question that comes to our mind immediately. If total expenditures are the aggregates of the components, when one of the variables on the right-hand side of the equation increases, how Y remains unchanged. For example, when public spending is increased within the framework of fiscal policy measures, Y should increase according to the income spending equation and shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. According to the monetarists, when public spending increases, Y increases if other components of the aggregate demand, namely consumption, investment, and net exports, remain constant. However, an increase in public spending, for example, has a dissuasive effect on private sector spending, and therefore other components of total spending decrease equally with the increase in public spending. The same amount private spending reducing effect of an expansionary fiscal policy, such as an increase in public spending, is called full crowding out. This situation arises with the effect of expansionary fiscal policies to increase interest rates. We can summarize the mechanism as you show on the screen. Keynesian economists also acknowledge that the increase in public spending will increase interest rates, but argue that the crowding out effect cannot be as full as monetarists suggest, but only partial crowding out. According to real business cycle approach, as you remember from your macroeconomic theory courses, prices are flexible in the long run. That is, firms adjust their prices to adapt to changes in costs or demand. When prices are flexible, nominal money supply has no effect on economic activity. In other words, money is neutral. Real business cycle theory argues that prices are flexible even in the short run, and the short-run equilibrium of the economy will be achieved at the natural output level. Therefore, according to economists who advocate the real business cycle theory, the short-term aggregate supply curve of the economy is vertical at the natural output level. Actual production in the economy may fluctuate over time. According to the real business cycle model, the main reason for the fluctuations in output volume in the short term are the temporary productivity shocks. Productivity shocks of temporary nature include changes in the availability of basic raw materials, regulations regarding the production and markets, and innovations that make the economy more productive. According to real business cycle theory, the increases and decreases in the money supply do not affect economic activities even in the short term. Even if the money supply and the production volume are correlated, it cannot be deduced that from this that money supply changes are the cause of output fluctuations. Proponents of real business cycle theory put forward two rationales for this hypothesis. According to the first of these reasons, another variable may be caused by change in money supply and output. On the other hand, change in production can also cause change in the money supply. This relationship is generally called as the reverse causal relationship. The second reasoning asserted is more important than the first. Accordingly, change in output occurring in the current period and expected in the future affect money demand, not the money supply. For example, let's assume that a period of recovery in the economy has started as a result of the efficiency shock caused by a temporary drop in oil prices. Money demand of economic units which expect an increase in future revenues will also increase. The central bank will also increase the money supply in the face of an increasing money demand as a result of the increase in production. Therefore, increases in production cause an increase in money supply, and increase in money supply does not cause an increase in production. Therefore, the relationship, the causality, is reversed. Economists have been conducting research for many years to test the direction and degree of the relationship between money supply and output. The results obtained do not support the real business cycle theory in the short term. According to our fourth approach, is the new classical approach. New classical economists established the link between money supply and production with asymmetric information. According to this view, business executives and workers cannot fully adjust product prices and wages in the short term because they do not have full information about future price changes. Inelastic prices prevent the neutrality of money in the short term. When economic agents estimate prices, they also activate their expectations regarding the money supply changes. Increases in money supply cause economic agents to expect an increase in prices. Naturally, the opposite direction also applies. According to the new classical economists, the effect of nominal money supply changes on output in the short term depends on whether these changes are expected or not. In order to understand the effects of anticipated, we mean expected, and unanticipated, we mean unexpected changes in money supply, let's assume that the economy is at equilibrium at the 0 point in the beginning. And let's assume further that the central bank has announced its decision to increase the money supply by 5%. This disclosure has become an information that economic agents will use to create future price expectations. This expected increase in money supply shifts the aggregate demand curve AD0 to AD1. As the increase in the expected inflation rate will shift the short-term aggregate supply curve from AS0 to AS1, like that, the new short-term equilibrium of the economy will be achieved at point 1. In the new equilibrium point, prices rose to P1, while output remained as Y0. According to this result, if the change in money supply is fully expected, this has no effect on output. Therefore, according to new classical economists, expected or anticipated money supply changes are neutral in the short term. In this case, we are faced a question that needs to be answered. What happens if changes in money supply are not anticipated by economic agents? For example, let's assume that the central bank surprised the economic units by increasing the money supply by 5% with a surprising decision. The anticipated increase in money supply increases the aggregate demand curve, and the AD0 aggregate demand curve becomes AD1 in this economy, which was initially in equilibrium at 0 point. As the central bank surprises economic units, the expected price level remains unchanged, and therefore there is no change in the AS0 position of the short-term aggregate supply curve. As a result, the new equilibrium point shifted to 1, and output increased from Y0 to Y1, while prices increased from P0 to P1. The reason behind the increase in output can be explained as follows. As the actual price level is higher than the expected price level, companies think that there is an increase in the relative prices of their products, and they decide to increase their production. As a result, it's possible to say that unanticipated changes in the money supply are not natural. The new classical economists conducted a lot of research to analyze whether anticipated and unanticipated changes in money supply have a different effect on output. It is very difficult to talk about the existence of a common view from these studies. The results obtained largely support that both anticipated and unanticipated money supply changes have an impact on output. This result contradicts the predictions of the new classical economists. Now we can analyze the new Keynesian approach. New Keynesian economists established the link between money supply changes and output changes in the context of inelastic prices. In this model, there are two reasons why prices are not flexible. In other words, price stickiness. We can talk about the price stickiness in the short run. Long-term contracts and imperfect competition between firms in the goods markets. According to the new Keynesian economists, anticipated and unanticipated changes in money supply are not neutral in the short term. The effects of unanticipated drop in money supply. Let's examine this figure. While the economy was initially in equilibrium at point zero, an unexpected decrease in money supply shifts the aggregate demand curve to the left, moving it from AD0 to AD1. As this contraction is not expected, prices will not be able to adjust to this change immediately, and the short-term aggregate supply curve will remain at AS0. According to the new equilibrium point indicated by 1, output decreases from Y0 to Y1, while prices decreases from P0 to P1. As can be seen, a change in output also occurs due to an unanticipated change in money supply. This means that unanticipated money supply changes cannot be neutral in the short term. Now let's consider what happens if there is an anticipated change in the money supply. New Keynesian economists also agree that economic agents will use all available information to form their expectations. Therefore, if a drop in the money supply is expected, there will be a decrease in the expected price level. In an environment where prices are flexible, that is, prices may change in the current period, companies can lower their prices. However, many prices in the economy cannot adjust to the change in expectations within the same period. For this reason, prices can only gradually adapt over time. In the face of an expected drop in money supply, similarly, if the markets are operating under monopolistic competition conditions and adjusting prices requires a high cost, prices will gradually adjust against the drop in money supply. Let's see what happens in the figure. The change that may occur according to new Keynesian model if there is an expected drop in money supply. According to the figure, while the economy is in equilibrium at the beginning, the anticipated decrease in money supply decreases the aggregate demand curve and brings it the AD1 from AD0 to AD1. At this point, some prices start to decrease by adjusting. Therefore, the short-term aggregate supply curve shifts to the right and becomes AS1. According to the newly reached equilibrium point indicated by 1, the output volume is lower than its original level. This means that prices cannot fully adjust. Note that the drop in output is smaller than the drop in case of an anticipated policy. Let's sign this with a dashed line. As can be seen, even the expected change in money supply in new Keynesian model can affect the real sector in the short term. However, the effect of expected money supply change on output is smaller than the effect of an unexpected money supply change. Let's finish this part, but I strongly suggest to follow the second part of this PowerPoint presentation.